Good afternoon, morning, or evening, everybody. I am Garrett. You are tuning in to my History 101 presentation on Sojourner Truth. She actually is a really cool lady, I found out as studying about her and learning more about who she is. And I want to share a little bit about her. So this is a photo of Sojourner Truth. And this is just brief, like very brief. I want to say I probably should have added more of what we're going to talk about. But a brief overview of who she was, what she did, where was she born, and a whole bunch of other lovely things that this lady accomplished. So yeah, let's hop right into it. So we'll start with when and where she was born. Sojourner Truth. Also, her first name is Isabella. She was Isabella for most of her life. She was born in 1797 in Ulster County, New York. Ulster, I believe is how you pronounce that. She was born into a family of slaves. Her mother and father were slaves. Her siblings were slaves. It's a generational slave family she's part of. And the family she was born into was the Hardenbergs family. They were the first set of people to own Isabella at this time. The Hardenbergs had then sold Isabella to John Neely, who had, at this time, Isabella was trying to learn English. Her first language was Dutch, and we will talk about more of that later, but she would try and learn English, and John Neely would beat her for her imperfect English, which I think is evil. John Neely then went on to sell Isabella to Martin Scriver, I believe is how you pronounce his name, and he was the last person for her he was the last person that was the owner of her, and he was a very good slave owner. As I was saying, she never really had any formal education. She ended up teaching herself how to speak English because her first language was Dutch, and over time her just listening in and learning, she could figure out words and ended up speaking pretty good English at the end of her life. She was never able to learn. She never learned to read or write, but she did dictate her bibliography, which I did end up reading, and it was quite impressive, quite good. She did a lot. My wife is saying goodbye to me because she loves me. She's going away for this weekend. Her marriage and family life, she was married to another slave man named Thomas. Thomas was also a slave. He's been a slave for all of his life. And together they had 5 children named and you can see their names, James, Diana, Peter, Elizabeth, and Sophia. Also, shout out to Mr. Riley because this class was amazing. Marriage and family life. You should take it. Yes, they had 5 lovely children who all, Peter kind of went on a little adventure. You'll read about that in a little bit. Some of the historical events. Oh, don't read this. This is cheating. You're not allowed to be there yet. Some of the historical events. She was a slave in New York and gained her freedom in 1826, the year before they abolished slavery in New York. And at this time when they had abolished slavery and she was free, I think it was John Neelan sold her son illegally to another state where it wasn't illegal to have slaves. And so he illegally sold her son, Peter. This is the adventure I was talking about. And she sued him and was one of the very first black women to win against a white man in a court of law. She also survived through the Civil War and the Reconstruction era where they got rid of slavery, which was just crazy how she gets out of slavery and then continues to live on to where slavery's just gone forever. Well, not forever. We all know about that. But some of her professions, she was an activist. She tried gaining her freedom, which she did accomplish. And she became a very powerful speaker against slavery. And she traveled around the country, I believe, delivering speeches to support getting rid of slavery. She was a women's rights activist. She was deeply involved in the women's rights movement, speaking at conventions, challenging the exclusive... I am struggling to read today. But really, really helped the women's rights movements for black women. She was a women's preacher. She wasn't a preacher that preached God's words to men. She was a preacher that went around preaching to other women. And her book goes on to tell her how she had a vision from the Lord, which I don't necessarily believe all the same, but she went around sharing her experiences, and because of the vision she had, and how she was being called to be a preacher to women, she changed her name from Isabella to Sojourner Truth. Fun fact. Her profession, she was an author, more of her profession. She was an author. She wrote this book, even though she could not, or she wrote her bibliography. Even though she could not read or write, she had someone write it down for her while she dictated it. And that was published in 1850, which helped spread her message. And she did help in the Civil War. During the Civil War, she recruited black soldiers for the Union Army and later worked to improve the conditions of freed African Americans. Her religion or worldview was a Christian. She believed, man, I'm struggling today. She believes that she was called by God to be a preacher, like I was talking beforehand, and this is why she changed her name to Sojourner Truth. She was originally a part of the Dutch Reformed Church until she gained her freedom, and then she became a Methodist. And she affected history, like I talked about some of these beforehand, but she was the first woman to fight for racial and gender equality. She was one of the first black women to win an illegal case against the white man. This is when we were talking about when her son was sold. And she was a very powerful voice against slavery, with gaining her own freedom and then going on with women's right movements to talk about how slavery was wrong. She had a very good stance and was a very, very powerful voice against that. This is what I learned. Sorry, this was cooked on my own. I don't have any special slides, but I personally learned a lot about this woman and what she had done for the country, what she had done for her fellow African Americans in her time. I don't know a lot about history, or let alone black people in history. I didn't do well with history in high school. And learning more about the efforts she put in for this country, I thought was really encouraging. And that she was called by God to be a preacher, and instead of doting around, she went and did it. That was also very encouraging. So she was a 10 out of 10 in my book, and she was a very pretty dope. She was a pretty dope lady. Yeah, not very. She was a pretty dope lady in my book. So that is what I have to say about Miss Sojourner Truth. She's a lovely lady. If you have any spare time, you should definitely give one of her books a read. She is quite encouraging in my book. So thank you all. Done.